Good morning. We think we're on. This is Dan Perna, and I'm with Jim Duffy, the Executive Director of Franklin County Career Tech. And we are here to present information concerning the study that was done in the spring that I did with several teachers from 5 different CTCs, and information we gained from them concerning their work in this new world that we are now facing. Each school took a very different approach to what they were doing. And so therefore, because they took that different approach, it made a difference. What we did have in the spring actually is changing education as a whole. I'm beginning to recognize that many of the things that we found in the study that we did are actually somewhat old, but the reality is they are things that may become part of traditional education. If we take a look at this, the fact of the matter is that what we have done, or what we did, we moved into, could we get the right screen there, Jim, please?
Which one do you want?
We want to go forward. One more.
Oh,
there
sorry.
we are.
There you go.
Okay. What actually happened was overnight, this whole thing took place. And we have this statement from Education Week from back in April, where it talks about that idea that it was an overnight change. In the study that we did, we found 75 teachers from 5 different career centers. And I want to personally give a thank you to Eric Westendorf of the Pittsburgh City Schools and Tom Boito, an associate of mine with James Daniel and Associates, who both worked with me on this study to find the information that we found from the teachers. Each school took a very different approach. Click it again. Each school took a very different approach in what they were doing. And in that approach, we had many different things happening, but I'm going to have Jim react to the fact of what Franklin County did and what they did in asking their teachers to move to a virtual online instructional program.
Thanks, Dan. I don't think we were alone in the fact that when that date, I don't know what date it was, March 11th or 13th came and we were told that we had to shut school. We all looked at each other and said, what are we going to do now? So there was a lot of, discussions, planning. What we did, we immediately got our teachers together on Zoom and had different breakout sessions to get their feedback on how they most wanted to approach this situation. And we decided to take a very open-ended approach to the situation that we were dealing with back in the spring. We felt, based on the feedback we got, we wanted to give our teachers the flexibility that they needed to address students virtually. We were fortunate in the fact that a lot of our teachers were doing some very unique things with online resources. And some were using Moodle, some were using other types of programs. And we didn't want to throw a new thing at them at this time. We wanted them to kind of soar with their strengths and use what they knew, use what the students knew. So we had a multifaceted approach to the COVID shutdown. We have a unique situation here in Franklin County that we feel like we have a very, very good relationship with the teachers. There's a trust factor involved. And as administrators, we decided, that we were going to put our trust in our teachers and let them use their resources in the best way that they knew possible. So again, our approach was very multifaceted. Basically giving the teachers the responsibility to set their own path.
What we've been asked to do in this presentation is take a look at strategies that people were using during the spring of 2020. As I was preparing this study or preparing this presentation, I thought about many of the things that we had seen in the study actually seem somewhat old, and some of you may look at that as them being old, but the reality is what we were dealing with was the fact that we had this sense that we were surrounded by first-year teachers. And therefore, we had to go into this with a totally different perspective than what we had done.
Yeah, first year teachers, but really we felt like first year administrators as well. I mean, how many administrators, if any administrators are on this link, you know, really had dealt with this situation before, and how many teachers had dealt with it. So again, we approached it from a team aspect, getting a lot of feedback from the individuals that had to implement our processes. And we also reached out to Dan at James Daniel and Associates to help us through, to gather information as we went forward.
We've been asked to present strategies that we learned during this study. And again, I'll repeat, 75 teachers were surveyed and interviewed personally. We had a set of 18 questions that we used. And here are the things that we learned and the strategies that we learned. Number one strategy that we would report would be this: follow and embed the trends. We talked with 2 nursing teachers, allied health teachers in one of the schools, and they pointed out that as teachers, they saw what was coming, and they began to really focus in on using their LMS, which in their case was Google Classroom. But we also saw that teachers who had determined what might happen, who were using Google Classroom, Moodle, Microsoft Teams, and knew that those types of systems were here to stay, they began to use those systems immediately or had been using them prior to March of last year. A second thing that we learned also was the fact that there were many people who got involved in this by doing what they saw was happening in the news. Jim had one of those teachers who began that process with his entire set of students right away. Jim, would you respond to that?
Sure. Our IST teacher, which is Informational Systems Technology, of course, his world is computers and his world is networking and all the stuff that goes with it. But he basically saw the writing on the wall as we were coming closer and closer to a shutdown, and proactively went out and contacted parents prior to the shutdown to kind of prepare them for the fact that we were going in this direction. He also was very instrumental in helping some of our teachers with some of the issues that they had. We had a lot, as I said earlier, we had a lot of curriculum in place, online curriculum in place, which made our transition much more easier.
The second strategy that we would point out would be simply this: teachers who had used virtual activity prior to the shutdown moved forward fluidly into virtual instruction. I have a list there of the types of programs that teachers had been using throughout these 5 schools that I met with. They had been using these programs regularly prior to the start of the COVID experience. You'll notice the names of some of these programs. And Jim has asked one of his teachers to come in today to share with us what he did in machine technology. Jim, do you want to introduce Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Brian Holloman. He's our computer integrated manufacturing instructor, and he did a lot of unique things with Immerse to Learn. You want to come over and sit down so they can see you?
Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, yes, I use the Immerse to Learn system a lot, and which is a great virtual learning tool. And I know I'd given Dan some other information I used as far as some online training. The thing with the Immerse to Learn training in our program is it's pretty much fully virtual. in the aspect that it's 3D animation with the CNC machines and also the programming. So with the lessons that they have in Immerse to Learn for CNC programming and the full emulator is what they call it, you actually have a full functioning working CNC machine in front of you on the computer. It's not real world, but it's as close as we can get, you know, to functioning through a virtual learning. I'm seeing some benefits with that with some of my students that are in line right now. And my students that I had in the spring will be showing back up here, and we'll see, you know, how they develop with some of that. And there were some other ones that I used, and I have used Tooling U in the past, and I'll hit Dan with something I didn't mention yet. And I actually just got involved with Solid Professor, another resource. So I'm really combining a lot of online technology into my program. And I also am very big with Moodle. So what I am doing now is I am incorporating all these lessons into my learning management system in Moodle, and it's doing all my grading, everything's in one place. So these online technology systems can integrate with your learning management system, and that's a big benefit and time saver for an instructor.
Brian, I'm going to ask you to mention one other program that I know you used, and that was Eduardo Stefanelli engineering program.
Yes.
When Brian told me about this, when I interviewed him personally last April, I went around to the other schools, and it was surprising the number of teachers who I met with who have now adopted this Stefanelli engineering program because of what it does. Would you explain that?
Yes, it's actually overseas. I'm not exactly sure where it's country from, but what it is, it's a fully functioning precision measuring tool system that is interactive on the screen. So students that are learning to read micrometers, dowel calipers, vernier calipers, a lot of that and indicators, there's a lot of other information on there. They're fully functioning online systems for measuring, and it's the actual tool right there in front of you on the screen that functions. So I know Dan has seen me using this in my classroom. You can, you know, a dowel caliper, they can literally slide the caliper, read the number, and it's a fully functioning. I can't emphasize how great of a tool it is for learning measurement systems.
An interesting thing I've learned about it was that I introduced it to some auto tech teachers who have more than just the measuring devices. There are other things in there for auto tech teachers or transportation program teachers, and they have now begun to adopt that program. One of the major benefits of this study was that I became the conduit to share information from school to school with teachers, and they began to take a look at these things that were available to them. A third strategy that, thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
A third strategy that we discovered as we went through the study was that teachers who had used the learning management system prior to the shutdown had the least frustration. I list several. I know some of you are hearing Franklin County talk about Moodle, and I realize Moodle is one of the older systems. However, when we look at all 5 of the ones that I have there, I would share this with you. The 2 allied health teachers that I referred to had been using Google Classroom. Therefore, their move to virtual instruction was much easier. And those teachers here at Franklin County who were using Moodle, their transition into virtual instruction became easier. The key is, if they had been using it, they had a lesser amount of frustration. So the strategy would be use an LMS that you know. One of the problems we saw in the spring, and one of the concerns was where teachers were trying to learn how to function with an LMS and teach at the same time. That made it very difficult. We know that many schools are now having their teachers trained in LMS programs, and that is critical that the teacher have that available and be able to work with it. I know here coming up in the fall at Central Westmoreland Career and Technology Center, we will be doing workshops for teachers in several things related to virtual instruction so that they can become familiar with it just in case we go back to this full virtual approach that we had in the spring. The fourth strategy that we would share with you that we learned in the study was this, and that was that procedures and routines are critical. And that I believe everybody now understands. But what we heard from teacher to teacher to teacher was set specific expectations, but recognize that a set schedule may not work. That was an interesting thing. We're going to come back to that later, but set specific expectations. The schedule, though, may have to be flexible. The other thing was that you had to routinize part of the process for meetings, whether it be a meeting, a weekly meeting, or some other type of activity, but routinize it. And then some of the specific strategies that we saw being used was that teachers sent out their expectations and parents had to sign off as well as the student. Many teachers set ground rules for pictures and discussion language. They not only sent out a list of expectations, but they related it directly to video and virtual instruction and set the ground rules for these pictures and discussions. The two allied health teachers that I referred to previously created a video in which they actually showed in the video, this is how we expect you to behave. This is what we expect you to do on a regular and sustained basis. So they established those expectations not only on paper, but they showed their students what was expected of them. In strategy 5, as we get to strategy 5, the difference between, one teacher made this comment, the difference between remote teaching and in-person teaching is very simple. There must be more communication with individual students and their parents. So here's what we learned. Number one, don't wait for it to happen. A welding teacher in one of the schools articulated to me how he set up a triangulation immediately between him, the guidance office and counselors, the special educators, and he included parents in this. So there's actually a quadrangle there. But what he did, he set it up immediately at the very start so that he knew when, and the guidance people knew when and why he would contact them. The special educators knew when and why he would contact them, and the same with parents. He went through this. Another thing that we learned was to be very vigilant. Establish a routinized approach to checking email, telephone numbers, and living arrangements. We found some teachers who actually routinized it to a point that once every week they would go through that process with their students. We are now finding teachers who are still doing the same thing. Every week or every 2 weeks, they're asking their students again, what is your email address? What is your parents' email address? What's a telephone number you're now using? What are your living arrangements at this point? The third thing was communication with parents. We found, and we will discuss this a bit later, but we found that the Remind app became very, very critical in that with many teachers across the 5 schools that we met with. This Remind app gave them the opportunity to deliver information to parents as well as to students, but that communication with parents was critical. The fourth thing was to consider anonymous texting. I'm going to turn this over to Jim because he had a teacher who used texting instead of email with all of his students, and I can report to you what he reported to us. 90% of his students were in attendance in meetings, turning in all of their assignments. Jim?
Yeah, our agricultural mechanics instructor is a very common sense type of guy. But one thing, you know, when we're thinking of all the platforms we can use and all the ways that we can do things, getting back to what do the students do? And right now the students text. That's their way of communicating. And he took advantage of that. He basically said that we're going to communicate via text. And because of that, he got pretty much the highest attendance rate within our staff. It had some kinks in the beginning because it was something new to us and new to him. He used his own personal phone, which, we would suggest either using a school issued phone or the Remind app to do it now. But it really worked for him, and that's what the key is. One thing we did find, one lesson learned through all this was, though, as teachers, more and more teachers started communicating via text and opening that line of communication, kids were texting at all hours of the day. And as we entered the fall, we're on a hybrid model now. So we have kids here during the day as well as kids learning virtually. We have them cut in half each side of the house. And a lot of our teachers were complaining that the kids were texting during instructional time, and they were struggling dealing with that and having live students. And the whole point is structure your day, as Dan said. Establish a routine, be vigilant, try to have a structure where there's a certain time of day that you're available for texting or available for communicating.
The sixth strategy that we would point out that we learned from teachers had to do with providing training sessions with students in how to use the LMS. Teachers who started by teaching students the LMS and then routinely reviewed how to use the LMS had the least difficulty. What the teachers all pointed out were statements like we have one on the screen right now. Do not expect students to know how to use Google Classroom just because they know how to use all types of applications. Many of the teachers learned very quickly, as I'm sure many of you did. They learned that just because they are tech savvy doesn't mean they can use this particular program. The other thing was that one teacher made it very clear. I recognized that I had to teach how to use Google Classroom my way. He pointed out that students had experienced Google Classroom, but they needed to learn how he was going to use it in his particular classroom. Jim, why did Franklin County stay with Moodle? I've had people say Moodle is an older system, but yet your school stayed with Moodle throughout this process. Why?
I go back to those first couple of weeks of shutdown and looking at each other and trying to determine what are we going to do if we have to provide continuity of education. And we found that Moodle was probably across the staff the most common means of communication that we used. Again, I go back to our IST instructor. He had used it for years, and just through informal networking amongst the staff with other teachers, we didn't provide Moodle training as a school at all. It was just an informal thing that Moodle kind of grew within the faculty through this teacher's seeds, and with that, we knew that would be the transition of least resistance that we had, or that we could use to go to virtual learning.
Strategy 7 is one that we're familiar with, but I have to share this with you that this came out over and over from teachers, and that is engage the parents. Teachers indicated 45% of parents were strongly supportive. 66% of the teachers said the parent communication was critical. One teacher pointed out that the experience was beneficial because he learned how to communicate with parents more effectively. A painting and decorating teacher in one of the schools actually involved parents in everything her students were doing. She involved parents in one way of having them assess their own students. In another way, she actually had parents doing some activity that she was teaching, and then she had the students assess the parent. Now, I will tell you that this teacher was very involved with parents from the get-go prior to March of last spring, but she made it very clear that that involvement of parents made a significant difference in her attendance, and it also made a significant difference in the success of her students. One of the things that we also found was that several teachers pointed out to us that they sent out every assignment and the deadline dates for assignments, not only to students, but they sent it out to parents as well. It was fascinating to hear the teachers talk about this when I interviewed them privately, because they were pointing out over and over that they felt this made a great deal of success in the response of their students. The fact that parents knew what was expected. In only one case were we told by a teacher that parents objected to that. In one case, a teacher pointed out that a parent did object, saying, this is my son or daughter's job, it's not mine. But we found where the parents were engaged, there was greater success in attendance and greater success in turning in material. There is another thing that we found, and that was the fact that have parents log into the LMS so that they can see the system in the same way the students do. There were several teachers indicated to us that they set up their LMS and made the parent a student, which gave the parent the opportunity to go into the learning management system and see what the kids were seeing. I felt this was very unique, and it is something that could be considered at all times, having parents see what their children are doing as part of school.
If I could add too, Dan, our teachers found that using the Remind app with parents was also a good thing. They had the parents on as a copy on the reminds to students that something needed in or something needed done, and that was very successful as well.
Jim's just pointed out something we heard over and over, not from all teachers, but from many, the use of that Remind app. And if you are not familiar with it, we would ask you to become familiar with it because it seems to be successful. The eighth strategy that we would mention is this: chunking the assignments. The research that we did, the study that we did, we found out from many teachers that they learned very early they had to chunk their assignments. Several teachers reported after the first couple of weeks, they realized they had to chunk everything down. They had to give small pieces to their students. Some teachers pointed out that they even had to do that a reading assignment or a video assignment required breaking those assignments into pieces so that students would do it. The most common way of chunking, we discovered, was done by one of Jim's teachers very early in this process. This teacher started by giving large assignments, and then he made a change. Jim, do you want to share with us what Andy Anderson did?
Yeah, Andy's our auto tech instructor. We started out administratively wanting to provide weekly assignments. Not really digging deep into the how that would be effective or not. And we learned very quickly that kids just couldn't handle on their own the fact that, they had this and this to do, and it was on their own time. So Mr. Anderson, our auto tech instructor, found that chunking those assignments, he gave the weekly assignment, but then he broke it down on what was expected each day of the week. And that became very successful. In fact, as we continue to share information throughout the spring with other teachers. More and more teachers went to chunking, and it was something that, as we came back with the hybrid model in the fall, we required teachers to do with their virtual assignments.
Strategy number 9 that we would share with you is very simply this: step by step by step. 49 of the 75 teachers noted that step-by-step direction was absolutely necessary. Now, it's interesting. They did not necessarily start that way, but over time, they discovered that they had to do these steps to get the best results from their students. One teacher stated, you have to write down every single step in Google Classroom. I could not assume anything. Another teacher pointed out, I spent a great deal of time doing the step-by-step details in Google Slides, and some of the students were still missing steps in this experience. Her point was that Google Slides, having each step on one slide, seemed to make it easier for the students to do what she had expected the students to do. Then we had a teacher say, I had to provide step-by-step directions for any new performance. Sometimes these required more than one day of steps. And so what this teacher did, he began to create videos. And in his videos, he said, he designated specifically, you have to do step 1. Now you have to do step 2. Now you have to do step 3. And he did this on a whiteboard with video, but he was doing it step by step, showing one step at a time, asking students to do something, and then move on to the next one. He felt doing it with video was the most successful way that he could do it. Another teacher had a very novel approach. Again, this is one of Jim's teachers, and that's why I have Jim with me to highlight teachers he has who's done this. But this teacher is one we referred to earlier. He had the highest success rate of attendance and maybe the highest success rate of students completing assignments. Jim, do you want to share this, what he did?
Yeah, a few years ago, we really got into learning focused schools, and the idea of graphic organizers was something that we felt was important. This teacher kind of carried that idea forward, setting up a 2-column worksheet format that he felt it was very effective, that on one side of the sheet, he lists what he felt the students needed to do, including the tasks involved, and the other side of the worksheet, then the students would complete the task and record what they did. Just from a organizational standpoint, it was very effective for him. It helped break down the assignments for the kids and make it much easier for them to understand.
If we move to strategy 10, it's something that we talk about as far as any classroom, but we talk about the importance of fostering relationships. One teacher noted the online lesson is just not the same as in-class interaction. I can tell students are missing school. Well, Jim had three teachers who definitely recognized not only were students missing school, these teachers felt they had to do something that would help to create these, what we will call relationship building experiences with their students. So Jim, I'm going to let you share those three teachers and what they did.
At the beginning of this whole process back in the spring, we didn't even think about the importance of socialization with the students. You kind of take it for granted. They come to school, they're around other students, but you don't really dig into the deep relationships that they form when they're here at school. And taking that away for an extended period of time was a concern for us, for a concern that we had for the students. So our teachers really started focusing on socialization and the aspects related to that. Our marketing instructor used Moodle forums in a great deal, kind of a conferencing type situation where she brought kids together for discussions and acted more, as it turned out, she was the leader of those discussions in the beginning, but as kids started interacting within that software platform, she backed off and became more of a facilitator of communications amongst the kids rather than the leader of those discussions. Our cosmetology teacher was another example. she would provide students with videos that not necessarily had to do with cosmetology in some ways, but it just provided them a chance to come together and watch the videos and then discuss, different aspects of the videos, just because of her concern for the kids and the lack of socialization that they might have while the school was shut down. And a third example was our veterinary assistant instructor created what she called Friday feedback, where on Friday evenings she brought the kids together through the virtual network and had discussions about how they were doing and how their pets were doing at home. Friday nights might not be the best time to do it, but for her, it turned out to be successful, and it worked for her. So.
The fourth teacher that we mention here is just a teacher who used a regular Wednesday meeting that he had scheduled. He had daily meetings time scheduled, but he used Wednesdays more for socialization than for academics and technology. What he did, he posed questions to the kids. Sometimes he would open it up to them, and he would allow time for just pure socialization. What all of these four teachers were doing was creating a type of socialization opportunity to foster their relationships. I want to go back to the top when Jim has mentioned that students engage in the forum discussions. Sue Mills shared with me when I interviewed her back in April, she said, I was afraid of this because I thought my students won't talk. But she said, the longer we were into this, and this is the end of April when I talked with her, she said, the longer we were into this, the more I could step back and do nothing. They just looked so forward to that forum every week when they would have a forum to be able just to talk one another. So even though it's virtual, we still have to think about fostering those relationships. Strategy 11. I would like to think this is a no-brainer to people, particularly after what we've gone through and what we're still going through. But the strategy I state is video, video, video. Many of the teachers that we interviewed, and we interviewed each one privately, I spent anywhere from 45 minutes to 70 minutes with teachers, these 75 teachers, talking with them about the questions I had set up. I found that video became just abundantly used. They found they started out with text, they moved from text to video. They started out with still pictures, they moved from still pictures to video. And so these are the kind of things that we discovered. Giving directions in video seemed to work best in getting return on assignments. We heard from many teachers that once they began to give assignments on video, they had a greater response. They did not send out a paper with the directions alone. They might send a paper with it, but they had a video to explain, self-made video to explain the assignments. We also found this. Many teachers moved into the corporate world. Would you back up, Jim, please? If we can, that's okay. Many teachers moved into the corporate and professional associations where they found videos that were best for demonstrations. For example, in welding, AWS, we had a welding teacher that told us all about the videos produced by AWS. And what we found was teachers went to them. We found teachers who were involved in the Pennsylvania Auto Association who went to videos that they had available. They were professionally done. Many of the auto companies have professional videos done, and teachers found them to be very successful. We also found that a video lesson worked best when the video was chunked and included direct viewing questions. Now, what are they? What they are, the teacher gave the students questions prior to the video and say, I want you to answer these questions as you watch the video. Now, we know that students might not have done that. They may have answered them later. But the point that the teacher was making was these directed viewing questions will tell you what to look for in the video. A fourth point, self-made videos require technique and strategy. And I'd like to show you in the next slide what we discovered that you have to think about. Video requires this strategy. So if you're going to use self-made video, first you have to show the process, not your face when making a video. Jim has a teacher here who has been doing that for several years. And what he does, his performances, he videos the performances when he's modeling them, but you never see him. You only see the performance, and he can have students go back to review those videos over and over. A second point, if you're going to use video, self-made video, speak slowly, step by step when making it. We even encourage you to say, step one, using transitions. Now I'm going to go to step two. Next, we will do step three. Those kind of transitions break it up for the student. Third thing, think in terms of whole, part, whole when using a video. You might want to say to students, I want you to watch this video. When we're done, I'm going to have some questions, and now I'm going to show you parts of the video. Part one, part two, part three. That's where you see the whole thing. Then you break it down by parts. Then at the end, you go back to the video with some review questions that you would ask them to do. Fourth point, chunk all lessons with short, brief parts. And here's something found in the research about video. Once you go beyond 7 minutes with a video, you start to lose students. So it becomes very critical that you create chunks with video. And that can be via questions. After you see this part, do these questions, or I'm only going to show you part one today, whatever it may be, but chunking that is very important. The final thing is create your own video library. We believe that every teacher has now done this virtually. Somewhere you should be cataloging and saving your own video library so that you can recall these and use them as you need them. There is no question that what we learned in this research, in working with teachers, asking them questions, video became the prominent source of delivery of information. So we would ask that you consider that and consider these steps as part of it. Strategy number 11. 12, I'm sorry, strategy 12. We're moving to the elephant in the room. And that is, what do we do about hands-on? How can we do hands-on? The real question that came out over and over, how do we engage students in hands-on? Well, the first thing that we believe teachers had to think about is, how can I engage students in what you can have them do, not what they can't do? You have to have them thinking about what they can do at home. Secondly, is you have to think about what can be done, not what cannot be done. And the third point is, many teachers indicated by doing all the theoretical work in the spring, it helped. Jim, I'm going to turn that one over to you.
Yeah, that was something that we talked about a lot, and a good example would be our HVAC program. He tried to do as period as possible during the virtual shutdown so that kids could come back and be prepared in the fall to do more hands-on. And we carried that concept through to the fall. I don't think I mentioned, and you may not know, but we are a semester about a full day. So we have the kids for a full day for a semester, and then we get a new group in about midway through the school year. So that provided us with a lot more opportunity for this. And the way that we're doing our hybrid model now is that we have half of our kids, 4 school districts, coming 1 week for live instruction, while the other half, which is the other two school districts are at home for virtual, and that rotates throughout the semester. So we're trying to do, when the virtual week, as much theory as possible for when they come back to us for live instruction, then they can apply what they learned here at the school.
On the next slide, we're going to show some of the hands-on things that actually did occur out there. There was a decorating and painting teacher who I referred to before, who had the parents so engaged. She just used parent engagement to get students to do hands-on activity, whether it was checking out colors within the house, whether it was actually painting in the home, or doing some form of decorating on just a scrap board that was available to the students in their home. But she engaged the parents as part of this so that the parents knew what was happening. Jim, do you want to tell us about Brian Yeager, your ag mechanics teacher?
Yeah, he really made the students learn the POS as part of this, and the program of study and the tasks that are involved with his program. And based on that, he wanted them to identify a task on the POS at home that they could accomplish and do a home project. And he had them do that, give him feedback on what the home project was, and then they basically self-rated themselves on their performance on the home project.
We interviewed a logistics teacher who I thought had an interesting thing, and any of you who are parents would probably love this idea. And that was what he did. He told his students, you have a job to do. You need to take a picture of a closet that is primarily your closet, but if you don't have a closet, take a picture of a closet in your home. Send that picture back to me. Now what I want you to do is empty the closet, take everything out of it, and catalog everything that you have by specific, I'm going to say catalog idea. In other words, all shirts go together, or all things that are shoes in a clothing closet go together. You create a system for that closet. So what he had them do was first send a picture of the closet as it was. Then they had to send a picture of an empty closet. Then they had to return to him this cataloging of everything that was going to be returned to the closet. And then finally, the students had to put everything back in the closet in an organized fashion and take a picture of it, but send to him, section 1 of the closet has this, section 2 has this, section 3 has this. His whole point was, this is what logistics is all about. This is something that they could do at home. Jim, you had an auto tech teacher that took a unique approach to hands-on.
Yeah, he took it upon himself to help some of his students find part-time jobs in the field during the shutdown. These weren't necessarily co-op jobs, but for some of the third-year students who would be graduating, he felt it would be a good way for them to, practice what they had learned in this program, and also, the learning loss was a concern for him, and he didn't want them to lose anything in this process.
It's interesting what Jim has just said, because this young man, I meet with him regularly in this school. He's not the least concerned right now with learning loss. He believes that he will be able to move forward with his students. I also interviewed a carpentry teacher who said, I know that hands-on is tough. So he said, what I did, I gave my kids the opportunity to do any project that they wanted to do at home. He said, I let the parents know about it. And he said, I cautioned them on safety matters. I cautioned them, for example, I don't want you up on your roof doing something. But he said, if you can find something to do a project at home, go ahead and do it. He had students who were doing things with things like popsicle sticks and so on, building things, but doing it the way it was taught at school. And he also incorporated the POS in that process. Jim, do you want to talk about your horticulture teacher?
Yeah, a couple other examples. Our horticulture teacher gave students seeds to plant, and they had to, as a home project, monitor the the growth of the plants and do some charting related to plant growth. Also, another good example, our cosmetology teacher had her students do some different types of activities at home, cutting family members' hair, pedicures, manicures, and videotape them to be sent in to the cosmetology instructor for her evaluation then.
If we go to the next piece of this, we're going to share with you what some teachers said they would do differently. Now, remember, we did this study last spring. So some of these things may be being done by these teachers, but these were a couple of the things that we said. Number one teacher pointed out, I would set up multiple classes and differentiate each group. Then he would set up small groups within a curriculum framework related to the small group. His whole approach was, I would have small group instruction. Another teacher pointed out that he would set up multiple sections of a class, then teach synchronously his instruction to the small groups at times when the small group could meet. We heard from many teachers that it was very difficult to do synchronous teaching last spring because of many things. One was the number of students in one home trying to get online at one time. Tech schools we heard that we talked with, we heard the idea that kids were working, so they can't meet with us synchronously. Well, this teacher said he would automatically set up multiple sections of the class, each one at a different time. A third thing that we heard was that just simply this, I'd step out of the box and try some things differently. It goes back to a previous slide, not to think about what you can't do, but think about what you can do. The final thing that we would share with you is what should we consider for the next virtual period? And I know everybody's worried about that. Jim's going to refer to it in a moment. The first thing we have to share with you, asynchronous must be linked with synchronous. We heard so often last year that synchronous teaching was a major challenge because of challenges that students had in meeting at a specific time. The second thing that we would say that you need to think about, go into the system as a student so you see what students see. You know, you might think, well, everybody should do that, but we discovered in our research only about 4 teachers who actually did this. They set it up so they became a student and they could see what students were seeing, not just what they were seeing as they developed their virtual teaching. Next point, stay at least 2 weeks ahead in your planning. And Jim, I'm going to let you react to this with what's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say, we just learned this week, our Franklin County is moving from moderate to substantial in the COVID category. So we're on a 2-week timeline that we could actually be going back to total virtual instruction here in the next coming weeks. So we're trying to plan right now as we speak for that event.
Okay, our last one we're going to pass over and we'll just go, Jim, bring up our information. We'll go to any questions that you have. Go to the past. You said there were questions.
Yeah.
Yes, I can read those to you. One of the questions is, as the only ELA teacher for the whole school, I have 425 students. I'd love to communicate better with parents, but it's so overwhelming. Any advice?
Well, the first thing I'll say this, God bless you and pray a lot. But I think one of the pieces of advice that we would give you, and since you're ELA, you may have multi-languages involved, so this could be difficult, but that Remind app became very, very used very, very much. Jim's school adopted it as a whole, and they were not fully aware of it until another school introduced it to me and I mentioned it to them. They've adopted it as a whole. That Remind app really, you're just using a reminder. It's a statement that goes out to people. The other thing that we would say would be that communicating with parents is a matter of opening those lines of communication, possibly with some types of, I'm going to be here available to parents once a week at a certain time, that type of thing. And you may be surprised how they may react to it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, you can get the PowerPoint. We will flash up our email addresses. We'll put it up and we'll get them back to you. Thank you. Oh, by the way, another thing, if any of you would want the full report, it's 208 pages. It has many comments in it from teachers. If you send me an email requesting it, I will send you a PDF of the full report. It is 208 pages of information, but you may be able to scan through it, and really it has a survey at the start, what we found in the survey, and then the 18 questions that we asked teachers. There's way too much in it to report in 1 hour.